Welcome. Thank you for joining me today. This is the second part of a three-part series on fearless compassion, working with fear, working with anxiety, and seeing how that can be an education on fearlessness. So today we're going to work specifically with the practice of Tonglen. Tonglen is one of the most rich and fertile practices for learning compassion. It's part of the whole Mahayana Buddhist era. And it can seem a little counterintuitive as I start to describe it to you. So I want to just get you ready for that. Because in this practice, we're becoming fearlessness by observing fear. We're becoming compassionate by seeing the frailty of our own human mind, our own lack of compassion. We're strengthening our altruistic intention by experiencing how primal the drive is to protect ourselves. So that does sound counterintuitive, doesn't it? But it's why it is so rich, because we start to see, oh, this is who I would like to be. This is how I would like my mind to be. And in order to get there, I have to see who I am. So it's a part of a vast treasury of bodhisattva trainings, probably the most universal of the bodhisattva trainings. And I want to begin with a quote that never ceases to inspire me. It's from a book called The Way of the Bodhisattva. And it's the favorite quote of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. You might have heard him repeat it. As long as space endures, as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain and dispel the miseries of the world. So not only in this life, but in life after life, may I remain and dispel the miseries of the world. It's important to understand that this is the aspiration that has been made by a lineage of human beings who've achieved that state. And when I think about how to understand that as a modern person now, I return always to Martin Luther King, to Mother Teresa, and really go back to their words and their actions and imagine what it actually was like for them. So it's not that they were not fearful. They were human beings, so of course fear arose for them. But they trained their minds so that loving kindness was stronger than the fear, more pervasive than the fear, and more familiar than the fear. So this is what Tonglen helps us with. We train in expanding our loving kindness, dissolving the fear, opening to the fear, and widening our capacity to take in the suffering of the world in absolutely the stages and time frame that's right for us. So every time I practice it, it's totally different. One thing I've been contemplating this week is the story of the wonderful priest who was sick, and his parish raised the money for a ventilator. And in the hospital, he gave the ventilator to a little boy. And I find it really poignant because recently I had pneumonia, and I can still remember very clearly what it was like to not feel like I could breathe, and how frightening that was. And so it's not that that priest was not fearful, but his love was stronger than the fear. So today, as we begin, I want to start with the intention of dedicating our gathering, our meditation this morning, to the first responders. So just like us, of course they have fear. They don't have time to practice in a gradual way that is taking baby steps when they need to have baby steps. They just go in out of dedication and their extraordinary altruistic motivation. So we're practicing today for them, and may we become capable of that level of courage and that level of loving kindness. So the first step is to really understand it's a gradual process. In the training of the Bodhisattva, we talk about 3 stages. The first stage is the king, the second is the ferryman, and the third is the shepherd. So the king may be just where we are today. The king gathers all of the resources that are needed for his kingdom. So we're gathering all of the trainings and all of the stages of the training and getting to know the stages of the training so that we can develop a wider compassionate fearlessness. The second stage is the ferryman. And I can really relate to that stage today. That's the person who invites everybody on the boat and says, we'll cross the road together, we'll cross the river together. So just by practicing together today, I know that I'm going to have a bigger capacity. And working together, we will all have widened our capacity and have grown a little bit. And then the third is the shepherd, who's looking out for his flock and telling everyone to go ahead, all the sheep to go ahead, while the shepherd, he or she, faces the wolf or the danger. And so that's what we aspire to. That's the great mind that is the fruit of our practice. And I love those examples, but I wanted to find something a little more modern today. So I thought about that we could practically all relate to learning to drive. So if you remember when you first started learning to drive, how big and powerful the car felt when you were in the driver's seat. So the car in this example is our mind. Our mind is huge, unwieldy. We move the steering wheel a little bit and it goes off the road. We press the gas pedal a little bit and it, juts forward. So we have to, just at our own rate of speed, gently tap the gas pedal. We have to be in the empty parking lot practicing and stopping and practicing and stopping. And most importantly, we have to have a map. So we know that one day we'll be driving on the road and we need the map to get to Boston. Or in this case, we need the map to get to the Great Mind. So Tonglen, this practice, is the map to get to that Great Line, but we're meant to go at our own rate of speed, our own experimentation with what's too fast, what's too slow, etc. So I want you to feel assured that this is a lifetime practice for your self-exploration. And there isn't a perfect way to do it, or a right way or a wrong way. You will encounter what you encounter, feel what you feel, and the map just gives you ways to work with that. So it has 4 stages, and the first stage is what we call flashing on openness or flashing on the absolute. And this is important because it gives us confidence. So in this step, you recall a time when your mind felt open, spacious, and relaxed. Now, it may not be accessible right in this moment. You may have to give yourself time and exploration to find some sort of quality of memory or experience that has that openness and spaciousness. And you might feel that you actually don't have that kind of experience. And that's perfectly okay. On the one hand, we can trust that in this lineage for thousands, literally, of years, people have found that space. So eventually we will as well. And you can lean on my experience at the moment of just going out and looking at the sky. So the easiest way for me to touch this space is to walk outside and look at the sky and feel the difference between being in my, small house or small room and then being outside in the bigness of outside. So just from that contrast, inside and outside, I can feel my mind expanding. And when I look at the sky, I remember how often I contemplate the sky and not only how vast the sky is, but why it's such a good example. So if you think about the sky, here where we have tons of blizzards, one day it can be a stormy blizzard with snow and ice and winds, and the next day it's perfectly sunny. So there's a sense that not only is there continuous change, but the sky is never hurt by the weather. So we can be tormented and filled with, in this case, fear about the epidemic. And then we can relax and open and remember that beyond the fear is the bigger mind that also can hold the spaciousness of a sunny day, that can look directly at nature and remember in this moment, in this fleeting second, there is a relaxed spaciousness. So I'm inviting you in the next, in the coming days, to just notice when your mind stops all the fast thoughts, when your mind relaxes, if only for a second. It can be like seeing the smile of somebody you love. It can be noticing that one of your plants is in bloom. Anything that all of a sudden refreshes your mind and relaxes your mind. The steps are progressively difficult. So the second step is a way of welcoming what we normally don't want, what we normally try and protect ourselves from. And we start by imagining that as we breathe, that there's a texture. And this is very interesting because normally our breathing feels very safe, something that we've not thought about very much, something that we accept as lovely and wonderful and beneficial. As pollution became more significant, when we go into places that we know are polluted, we know all of a sudden we have a different relationship with the air. So we're maybe more hesitant to take a deep breath in Delhi, for instance. And then at this moment, when we know that the virus is airborne, we feel that all of a sudden the air can be dangerous. So, this is a really good example because right now the simple act of breathing can allow us to see what our own fear is like. And that is a way of just saying, I have wanted to get to know you. It's really good to see you. And welcoming that feeling so we know what it's like. We know what we're resisting. And at the same time, on the out breath, we see the primal drive to self-protect. So taking in only the dense, giving out all this fresh air from Maine. And you may feel at sometimes the in-breath is more difficult, and at sometimes the out-breath is more difficult. Like, I need to have all this fresh air. I'm not sure I can give all the fresh air away right now. So however your mind imagines it is your way of starting to see what your boundaries are, what your experience of fear is, what your experience of self-protection is and what your experience of your altruistic heart-mind is, all mixed up together in the simple act of breathing. So when we're in this situation, we can deal with it normally in two different ways. Breathing in, you might feel, whoa, I'm hesitant. I feel myself taking a shorter breath or a partial breath when I breathe in. And it might feel physical to you, or there might be a thought about what you're afraid of. But it might feel fairly gentle, and you can say, oh, I see this, how interesting, and I can keep going. I can keep going until the in-breath and the out-breath become both even, and you can accept and welcome the dense, the smoky, the imaginary germs. That might be your day today. Or it may be that you're breathing in and you feel the resistance and it even becomes physical to you, like a feeling in your chest, or the thought of breathing in something dense right now, even a little smoky right now, not even thinking about germs. It might feel like a giant brick wall has gone up. And you go, oh, okay. Today's practice is not so much about evening the breaths. Today's practice is more about looking at fear directly. That's so interesting. I'm going to work with that then today. So in all of these cases, we are taking in something that we normally wouldn't want to welcome. Just as it is, we're seeing what arises, and over time, we're expanding our capacity to open. And we're doing that through the medium of the breath. So let's say fear arises in a very direct and visceral way for you, and sort of stops you in your tracks. How do we work with fear? So then we start to look at, well, what is the nature of this thought or this feeling that's arising? First of all, it's impermanent. So if you look at the feeling, you start to see that it fluctuates, maybe a little more intense, a little less intense. It doesn't remain the same constantly like a brick wall. It actually shifts a little bit. And our mind is moving so fast, we don't see that we're giving rise to the fear over and over again. And that's what makes it seem like a brick wall. So we start to look at how it's impermanent. And one way is to look at the fluctuation. Another way is to stop the discursiveness, the narrative of what the fear is. And when you stop the narrative, it actually can't sustain itself and it goes away by itself. Similarly, the physical feeling, if it's not called over and over again, will feel like some sort of sensation. For each person it's different, but then it will disperse on its own without the narrative to sustain it. So that's very interesting, just to notice, wow, it is actually impermanent and I can prove that to myself. We can change the subject. You can take a sip of tea and notice that when you're tasting the tea, you're not thinking about the fear. We can also notice that it is illusory, that the nature of a thought actually is illusory. And one way to do that is to really explore the sensation a little bit historically. So I remember when I was a child, and if I had to be home from school because I was sick and my mother ran out to the grocery store, I used to be really afraid at the sounds in the house. And I would get so afraid I had to hide under my bed. So I can really remember that sensation. And then I used to love scary movies later. And I can remember that sensation of what it's like to watch a really scary movie, how it'd start to have unease and then it would get more intense and more intense. But in both cases, like my mother would come home, then the fear was not there anymore. Or the lights come on in the theater and you remember, oh, it's a movie. I'm just sitting in a movie. So in the same way, we're breathing in something slightly dense, and we're feeling uncomfortable, and that's starting to deepen. And we can remember, this is my imagination. I'm sitting here in my nice, comfortable chair, breathing the fresh Maine air. It's not dense, it's not smoky, it's not filled with germs. So all of a sudden you realize, oh my goodness, this is my mind. So that's really the important thing, to understand that it's your mind, and how we hold our minds determines our experience and is our choice. The more we have training, the more it becomes our choice how we hold our minds. So that's why, as we develop our capacity, we're able to hold fearlessness and our altruistic, loving, kind minds more strongly than succumbing to fearful minds, because we're training in making it more familiar. We're training in seeing how impermanent it is. Sometimes, for instance, if you're having a nightmare, you can turn around and face whoever it was that was chasing you, and all of a sudden extend compassion to what you thought the monster was, and it all dissolves. So we're working with our minds, and the significance is we want to get to a point where in any situation, we're holding our minds in this fearless, compassionate state. We could walk into the grocery store and extend our compassion to the clerks and take in what they have to experience that day and give them some of our open, relaxed, loving mind. You know, eventually extending that to more and more difficult situations. It's not that we're intentionally putting ourselves in a dangerous situation by any means. Right now, we're just sitting in our chairs. But when we have a greater capacity, we could walk into the emergency ward, acknowledging that it's dangerous, taking every practical step, but holding fearless compassion. So I want to give ourselves a chance to practice the first two steps. And I'm going to take you through that. And to help you today, to flash on the openness, I recorded a video of the gorgeous morning we had yesterday in Maine. So the first step is flashing on open, spacious, relaxed mind. Fresh air, clear sky, the potential of spring, potential of morning. Just flashing on open, relaxed space. Knowing that this is your capacity, let's take a few minutes simply breathing and imagining this morning that the air has a texture to it. You can increase the difficulty at your own rate of speed, but you can start with just slightly thicker air. Breathing in what you would normally not want, and exhaling the sensation that makes sense to you right now of relaxed spaciousness, sunlight, quiet, whatever occurs to you as a sensation. And if something arises, like a tight chest or a little resistance, oh, how wonderful. Can I look at that a little bit? Until your breathing is open and relaxed. Let's stick with this just a few minutes. So these are the first two steps. And in part 2 of Tonglen, we'll look at the second 2 steps. So I invite you to just begin with these. Start to feel at ease with them. The step-by-step instructions are on the Vajradakini Nunnery website. And for your support, we will have morning meditation 2 days a week during this crisis period, which you can also join in. And we'll be working a little bit with Tonglen in those morning meditations. So I'd like to leave you with 2 quotes, actually. One from the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. So it's referring to beings who have been working with the Bodhisattva trainings. Those whose minds are practiced in this way, whose happiness is to soothe the pain of others, will venture into the hell of unremitting agony as swans sweep down upon a lotus lake. So as we practice this training, the circumstances, the outer circumstances, will matter less and less. until the outer circumstances make no difference. And if you imagine, like here we have cormorants sweeping down onto the ocean, so gently, so joyfully. Our mind, as it's resting in this fearless, compassionate state, has no concern other than how to benefit others. So it's about how we're holding our minds, whatever state we're in. And the second quote is from Pema Chodron's book, Welcoming the Unwelcome. Only by learning to fully embrace all aspects of ourselves, even the most seemingly negative elements of our minds and hearts, will we learn to fully embrace others. Only by discovering the basic goodness in both our lotus and our mud will we come to see the basic goodness of all living beings. So I hope you will join me next week in learning the second 2 parts of this practice. And I really thank you for taking the time to explore this training.